Welcome to another session from Altura Tech. My name is Guillermo Cardona, and today I'm going to show you how to clone a record with Power Automate. We had a client where they basically had a record, they had a record and entity where they would enter a lot of information and actually had child information, and sometimes they need to create a copy and only make minor modifications. So they approached us and said, is that something that can be done without investing into a very costly solution or creating code? And I said, sure, we should be able to create this with Power Automate. The idea, of course, is to create a process where if you push a button, the record gets cloned. We're going to make an assumption that you don't need to copy all the fields for the demo of this on this video. If you want to extend that, of course, you can copy everything that you want. So we'll show you different techniques on how to copy different types of fields, and when, of course, to launch that flow from a record. The entity that we're going to be creating has children records or sub records, so those will be copied as well. And again, following the mantra that we adopted years ago, we use low code or no code at all. And of course, this needs to be run as close as real time as possible. And again, keep in mind as a use case, imagine that you're creating an estimate that needs to be given to a client, and you want to have multiple versions of that estimate with maybe only changing a few things. This is where you would use that. Now, of course, this has been used for years and years, or has been done for several years using plugins and/or JScripting. Um, the whole idea behind this video is to show you how you can get away from that and use the out-of-the-box features, like in this case, Power Automate. Yes, this can be done also by a third-party tool. There's several out there on AppSource. However, there's some considerations that you have to worry about, like long-term support and cost considerations. All of them will come up with some sort of subscription model. Well, you have to pay forever basically in order for it to work. Again, it really depends on your client. If your client says that they're okay with that, then by all means that'll probably be the easiest way. Otherwise, I want to show you a way that you can do this with out of the box. Now, cloning does exist in some entities, but these are some of the out of the box entities that come with some of the apps that Microsoft released. However, if you create your own custom entity, like it was the case of my client, then you can't just activate the cloning. So we'll show you how this is done for any entity. We're going to create, as I mentioned, a Power Automate flow that gets triggered when the record is selected. So I'll show you a few things on typically how you would trigger a flow. The same way, you can actually do the same using a custom button. There are articles out there on how to do that, but I'm going to go with straight out of the box features. And I'm going to show you how the flow looks at children records and create every single record out there, regardless of how many there are. Okay, so let's go ahead and dig into this and see how this is done. So let me go ahead and show you kind of like the final product of what ultimately we're trying to achieve. I have an entity called Task List Templates. This sort of works kind of like the playbooks functionality on the Dynamics 365 Sales app, where you can create a template of custom tasks that you want to apply against a record if you were to associate that record with this template. And basic functionality. I tried to recreate this for this example. So I have the parent entity that basically has three fields. There's a Boolean here. There's a option set, and there's an actual text field. And then I have a child entity called plan tasks, where you can then create the different tasks that you have, which again, you have some text fields. You have this is an option set, dates, etc. The idea is that if I have a user that wants to duplicate this without having to retype everything, I mean, imagine that you had 50 different tasks in here and having to redo that all the time would be a pain. So you would go into Flow and you select underneath Run, clone the tasklet template, and it will run. Okay. Before I show you how that would run, let me go ahead and tell you how that was done. Now, within the make.powerapps.com, or the actual editor for Dynamics now, the new one, I went ahead and created a solution and then created the flow. Now, why did I do that? I wanted to take advantage of that Common Data Service Connector, the current environment one, the new one. There are several reasons. One being that when you're doing a list of records, it's a lot easier to work with that than it is with the older one. Plus, I don't have to parse anything. I don't have to convert anything. Everything's already there. So, but the only way how I can actually have that connector be available is if I start from a solution. So I create a solution, and from there I went into new and went into flow and created the flow. Now, as I mentioned, most of the steps are using the new connector. However, in order for me to see this flow show up underneath the flow button of the entity, I have to use the old connector. And underneath the old connector, there is a trigger called when a record is selected. Now, this is the flow or the trigger that I have to select, and then I select the environment as default, and then I select on entity name, I choose whatever entity I want. Now, this, of course, will capture all the information from that parent record. The next step would be to create a copy of that parent record using the create action of the new connector, of the current data service connector, the new one, the current environment one. So I selected the entity, and then after that, it's just a matter of copying the fields that I got from the step number one and putting it on every field here on this step. What I did is on the name, I basically added a dash copy to basically differentiate one from the other. Everything else is pretty straightforward. I mean, if it's an option set, I can go ahead and do a straight copy. If it's an actual Boolean, I can also do a straight copy. That wouldn't be a problem. The problem would be on lookups, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now, the next step is actually getting the child records that are associated with that parent entity. So I did a list records action from the current environment connector, the new one. I selected the plan task, which is that child entity. And then I needed a filter to basically bring in any child records associated with that parent record, because that's going to be my basis for the new ones. Now, the way I do this is I did a filter using the value of that of the ID for the task list template. Now, how do I get to this? I actually was able to use the XRM toolbox to get to that. So let me show you really quickly how that's done. If you open the XRM toolbox, and if you don't have the XRM toolbox, I strongly recommend that you download and you start using it. There's a lot of information there, a lot of really cool tools. One of my favorite, of course, is the Fetch XML Builder, where you can build a Fetch XML and then get to see the information behind the scenes. Now, some of the features in here, I'm not going to get into how to use this, but there's tons of documentation out there. But I basically created the fetch of the actual entity, and then I did a condition, kind of the same condition that I wanted to do on the flow, which is a filter by the ID field, and then an equal, and then I just selected one of the parent records using a lookup. When I did that, then I went into view, and underneath view, there is a Power Automate parameters option. When I do that, this window shows up that basically displays what the filter query should be. So if you see the name of what you're supposed to put on the filter is not necessarily the name of the field, it's actually underscore the schema name of the field underscore value. So that's a very interesting tip that you want to know, but I mean, it's really cool that they actually built this into the XRM toolbox. And then space EQ for equal, then space, then whatever ID. So once I have that that value, I can then put it here on the filter query equals, and then use the ID of that original record. Then this step here will bring all the child records and put them into an array. Now, because this is an array, I need to have an apply to each control. It will be an apply to each of the value of this array. And then inside of that, I'll put another create action that using the new connector. And I go ahead and select the entity, and then I map the subject to subject, type to type, days after. 2 days after. Now, in this case, the task list template, the actual parent record, it's the one that we created on this step here. Well, it's a lookup, so I cannot just put in the actual ID because it won't work. The system needs to know where it needs to work. So there's actually a really cool article out there and a really cool website called Tips a Day where you can actually get to see, and it tells you what to do. And with out-of-the-box entities, you should be able to put in the schema name or whatever you see here under parentheses. So if it's contacts, you will put contacts. But for custom entities, you need to put in the schema name in plural. So my schema name is ACEDG underscore task list templates or template. And then the plural of that will be templates, and then parentheses, and then the ID. Okay. Once you do that, you save it, and then it basically will show up in Dynamics. So let's take a look and see how that works. Again, just to show you, I only have one record here. I'm going to go ahead and select it, go to flow, run the flow, and the system is going to say, yes, you want to run it. Click done. Now when I get to the list, as you can see, it's pretty quick. And here's the one that says dash copy. So as you can see, you can use out-of-the-box features to do pretty complex stuff with Power Automate. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. The information is here on your screen, like our 800 number, my email, and our website. As always, please subscribe to our channel, follow us on Facebook, as well as LinkedIn to get the latest on all the videos that we do and the blog post. We thank you very much for your time and have a great day.